You didn't walk in with a title. You didn't arrive with a curated entourage or the gleam of inherited power. No stage was set for your entrance, no spotlight followed your steps, and still the room shifted when you walked in. Not because of what you wore, but because of what you carried. The rich ones, the gilded cowards, the hollow giants. They looked up, and for a split second they felt something alien. Unease. You didn't bring wealth, you brought weight, and they don't know how to measure that. Their panic wasn't about your presence, it was about your influence. Unpurchased, uncoached, untamed, they could smell the rawness of it. Not chaotic, but crafted. You didn't have more. You simply needed less to shake the hierarchy. Their world is built on illusion, structured like a card house of veneers and optics, status inflated like currency in a market of manipulation. They lean on things, you lean on self. That's the difference. You walked in with your name, and it echoed louder than their bank accounts. Because you weren't seeking access, you were deciding whether they were worth engaging. And that kind of autonomy, it terrifies them. The rich ones are used to obedience, to curated silence. They expect you to look down, to pause before you speak, to hesitate in the presence of marble floors and false prestige. But you didn't. You looked right through them. You didn't challenge them. You rendered them irrelevant. And irrelevance to people who built their lives on perception is more destructive than poverty. The panic came not because you demanded respect, but because you didn't need their version of it. You weren't interested in their approval. You weren't impressed by their possessions. You weren't swayed by the brands they stitched onto empty souls. That's what made you dangerous. You refused to worship what they built because you had already survived without it. And when someone walks in, knowing they've created value without resources, without legacy, without permission, the ones who inherited their comfort feel it in their teeth. You became the reminder that wealth without wisdom is just noise dressed in gold. What you carried was formed in the trenches, not the elegant kind that's posted online, but the real ones. Sleepless nights, betrayal in soft voices, dreams that outgrew ceilings others tried to nail shut. You walked in covered in ash and came out looking like prophecy. That's what shook them. You were proof that power doesn't require polish, it requires presence. And yours came unfiltered. You weren't groomed for the moment, you built it. They had mentors. You had survival. They had plans. You had pressure. And pressure, when harnessed properly, doesn't just mold, it restructures. It makes you impossible to ignore. They like it when power looks familiar, when it dresses in tailored suits and speaks in sound bites. They don't know how to process someone who speaks in truth and silence, who doesn't sell their pain but walks in healed. That's what panics the elite. They can't monetize authenticity. They can't predict you. They spent years trying to buy the very essence you became through suffering, and now they have to sit across the table from someone who never needed them. You didn't flinch. You didn't pitch. You evaluated. You scanned the room not as an outsider, but as someone who knows the system's architecture from the cracks upward. They built castles. You built weapons, and they know it. Psychologically, they've been trained to expect dominance through display. That's why they fear quiet people. Quiet people don't broadcast, they collect. Every glance, every reaction, every fragile smile forced through their discomfort, you saw it. You didn't react, you registered. And that neutrality, that unnerves them. Because they don't know if you're planning something. They don't know if you've already won. And most terrifying of all, they don't know what you know. You came with less, but you saw more. You were overlooked until it became dangerous to keep doing so. You weren't loud. You were inevitable. They've spent their lives performing wealth, dripping in the symbols of success, drowning in curated excellence. But their security was always externally sourced. The day you entered, you introduced a different kind of currency, earned insight. You see, when you've had nothing, you learn to measure everything. When you've starved, you develop taste beyond the superficial. When you've been silenced, you learn how to listen for weakness in tone. And when you've been underestimated long enough, you stop announcing your arrival. You simply shift the atmosphere until they recognize they were never in control. Now they wonder how you did it, how someone with less gained leverage. They're baffled that someone they couldn't classify has become the axis of the room. They'll try to rationalize it, call it charisma, luck, timing. But deep down they know. You walked through every fire they avoided. You stared at truths they buried under inheritance. You don't carry fear the same way. You turned every humiliation into ammunition, every closed door into a corridor of strategy. And now they can't look away. Because you bring discomfort dressed as confidence. You bring truth without needing validation. And that, to them, is a kind of chaos no wealth can soothe. You didn't take their throne. You dismantled the illusion that they ever owned one. You didn't challenge their authority. You made it obsolete. Because when someone walks in carrying less and commands more, it means the metric of power has shifted. You are not the new elite. You are the correction, the disruption, the living reminder that earned is greater than inherited. And that panic you saw in their eyes, that wasn't fear of you. That was fear of being exposed. Exposed for never being more than a well-dressed placeholder in a game they thought was theirs to rig forever. So don't ever shrink to fit their comfort. Don't ever explain how you got here. Let them keep guessing. Let them keep pretending you got lucky. You didn't. You built this presence out of broken promises and battles they would have never survived, and now you carry something they'll never understand. Freedom, the kind they can't buy, borrow, or brand. You entered with less, and that's exactly why you're the one they're watching. Because when someone comes from nothing and still makes the powerful feel powerless, the room doesn't belong to the richest anymore. It belongs to the realest. And in that arena, you're already undefeated. They mistook your solitude for weakness because they couldn't hear the voices that walk beside you. They never saw the shadows that move when you breathe. The underestimated often walk with ghosts, not the kind that haunt, but the kind that remember. Forces not bound by applause or allegiance, but by memory. You helped them when they were invisible. You gave them shelter when they were drowning. You handed them pieces of yourself when you had nothing left. And now they walk with you, quietly, faithfully, strategically. These aren't allies. These are debts, paid not in coin, but in consequence. Shadows that owe you not favors, but redemption. And that loyalty, that's the kind of currency no elite, no predator, no loudmouth will ever understand. Because it wasn't built on fear. It was built on truth. You were the one who saw the fracture in the mask, who offered help when others backed away. You were never trying to be noble. You just understood pain differently. You didn't flinch at someone's breaking point. You didn't turn away from someone's guilt. You sat with them, not out of sympathy, but because you'd already survived the storm they thought would kill them. They remember that, even if years passed, even if names were forgotten. What you gave didn't disappear. It fermented. It turned into something dense, sharp, real. And now, as you move through a world that still dares to underestimate you, those shadows walk behind you with intention, ready, waiting not for your signal, but for your rise, because they know you never asked for anything in return, and that's precisely why everything is coming back. They never saw who you stood with in the dark, they only watched who clapped for you in the light. And that's why they miscalculated, because true power isn't what surrounds you when you succeed. It's what watches over you when you're forgotten. These shadows, they don't crave visibility. They crave impact. And they owe you. Each one carries a story. A moment when you stepped in while the world turned its back. They were not contracts. They were collisions. And now that you've begun to rise, they rise with you. Not to be seen, but to ensure you're not alone when the lights flicker. These shadows are not ghosts of your past. They are guardians of your path. And those who overlook you, they do so at their own peril. You don't summon them, you don't even name them, but you feel them. When you speak, your words carry the weight of dozens of silences you once broke on behalf of someone else. When you walk into a room, your presence unnerves the unfaithful, not because of your volume, but because of what walks just a breath behind you. These shadows remember. They remember how you stood when it was your turn to fall, how you lifted others while sinking, how you offered truth when lies would have made you likable. That's why they don't leave. They're not bound to your ego. They're bound to your essence. And they've made a silent pact. Anyone who tries to crush what you built will have to go through them too. The underestimated rarely brag, not because they lack stories, but because their life is the story. You don't speak about your impact, you live it, you walk it. You drip it in every glance, every decision, every calm you maintain in rooms meant to provoke you. These shadows, they aren't cheerleaders. They're reminders that what you did when no one watched is now becoming the reason people can't stop watching. They thought you came alone, but you arrived as a consequence, a convergence of every unspoken alliance your character earned. And now, when others look at you and try to dissect your confidence, they don't understand. It's not confidence, it's company. Those who owe you know who they are. They don't announce it, but they move when you move. They speak when you're silenced, and they protect what you value when you're too focused on the war to watch the gate. You didn't buy loyalty, you bled it. And because of that, the shadows you walk with are not followers. They are reflections of every unseen sacrifice, every moment you protected someone else's reputation. Dignity, even when your own was under fire, and now they protect yours in ways you'll never hear about, but always benefit from. This is the hidden architecture of the underestimated, quiet repayment. You don't keep a ledger, but the world does. And fate keeps exquisite accounts. You may never know when a shadow clears your path, when a connection is made in your name behind closed doors, when a hand was stayed because someone remembered your mercy. But it happens. Every time you move with integrity, the world whispers your name in rooms you haven't entered yet. That's why you don't chase. You attract. You don't perform. You pull. And when your name reaches the right ears, your shadows go to work. That's how underdogs become unstoppable. Not through public alliances, but through private loyalty. They fear you now, not because of your success, but because they can't trace it. They can't dissect it. You rose through channels they don't understand, and when they try to replicate you, they fail. Because your success wasn't built with hands. It was built with hearts, with unshakable character, with invisible allies who remembered the day you sat with them in hell and said, "I'll help you climb out." You did that, and now they're watching your ascent and clearing the skies for you. Not because they're obligated, but because you showed up before you were someone,